Hello and welcome. Each week the ministry team sits down together and we discuss, among other things, the forthcoming Sunday service or services. This week, when I was asked whether I would like to do the reflection for Sunday the 29th, my first reaction after saying yes, of course, was, what's the subject? Well, there was a chorus of responses from the rest of the team as they all said, Advent. Well, as Homer Simpson might say, don't. I had missed the fact that this coming Sunday is Advent Sunday, the first Sunday of Advent, the beginning of the beginning, if you like. I had missed this because life is so busy, isn't it? And without the regular pace of church life and the gentle movement through the church calendar, it's easy to become disjointed from the Christian cycle of events. It's easy to miss the little signs and the telltales that we have created through the centuries to keep us in sync with the church's year. Well, this problem is not a new one, of course, and throughout the centuries people have not been able to keep up with events. In fact, of course, this is exactly why we have calendars at all. Imagine a time when people could not generally read or write, and when such things as printed matter simply didn't exist. How then do we monitor the upcoming feasts, especially of Christmas? Well, today we would use the now popular circular Advent wreath to mark the weeks until Christmas. And that wreath originated in the 16th century, way back in the German Lutheran Church of 1500 and something. And to them it wasn't just pretty, it was vital. Back then they were not reminding themselves of the coming of a baby. The medieval world was preparing itself for the true and original meaning of Advent, from the Greek parousia, which means to come in person. The medieval Christians were actually preparing themselves for the second coming of Christ, not recalling the first. So the wreath was used to mark the passage of time between the start of Advent and the actual day of Christmas, C-Day, if you like. Now, whether the early medieval Lutherans really expected that after the suffering and fasting, perhaps, of Advent, that the sun would be darkened and the moon dimmed and the stars would fall from heaven and the powers in the heavens shaken to see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory, I don't know. But it seems that they did. And certainly, whatever they expected as men, women and children, they needed help in counting the days until it happened. They wanted to make sure that they were ready. Sadly, the human timescale is short, and after a few more hundred years of the second coming not actually happening, people moved away from expecting it to every year, and it was in about the 1800s that the original, as we now know, the popular Advent wreath was invented. It was another German. It was Johann Wichen, a Protestant pastor in Germany. He ran a school, in fact, for poor children. And he got so fed up with the kids during Christmas period, waking up every morning and saying to them, is it Christmas? Is it Christmas? Is it Christmas? That he developed the Advent calendar, little Advent wreath. He took a circle of wood, probably a cartwheel, and he stuck candles on it. And he did this so that he could light a small candle every day of the week. But on Sundays he would light a bigger, maybe white candle. And this way the children would know that today was not Christmas Day because there were still some candles left. But they therefore didn't need to keep asking him, is it Christmas? And give the poor chap a bit of peace, perhaps. I suspect the children were more eager to open their presents and stuff their faces with turkey or goose than they were to recall the coming of Christ, but we'll never know, and it doesn't really matter. Now, in today's Gospel, the Gospel of Mark, Jesus gives to his listeners a reminder that even God gives us calendars. God knows that humans need signs and warnings. We need a countdown to great events. We lose track otherwise. Jesus said this, didn't he, in that gospel? He said, from the fig trees, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and it puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. He's saying to them, look, there are signs. You can tell what's happening. You just have to look for them. He said that you will see these things taking place. And when you see certain signs, you will know that he is near. You will know that he is at the gates. And those signs, of course, were the falling of the stars, the darkening of the skies, so on and so forth. In other words, Jesus is saying that we can, just as we can tell what season it is based on what we see on the trees and shrubs, so we can tell whether the second coming is at hand based on what we see in the world. When the skies darken and the world is in upset, he says, be sure that God is at the gates. Well, medieval man saw many such dark times, and many times must have assumed that now was the time. Although medieval humanity waited in vain for the second coming, they prepared. Being prepared is vital, because just as the second coming is scheduled to be the last great resurrection and reckoning, it is a time when it's all over, and we will be weighed by God one last time. No wonder medieval mankind prepared. No wonder God gives us a set of signs, and no wonder that Jesus spent time advising us about it. Jesus tells us more when he says, but about that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Keep alert. You don't know when the time is coming, so keep awake. And that is really important advice. Christ is clear. Use whatever calendar you like, but you still won't know when the second coming is about to happen. No one will until it is upon us. But we still need to be ready. How can this be? How can we be ready for the Master's return if we cannot know when he will return until he's at the gate, until we hear that key in the lock? Simple, says Jesus. Stay awake. Always be ready. If you don't want to be asleep when the boss comes back, don't go to sleep in the first place. If you don't want to be caught speeding by that unmarked police car, don't speed at all. But what does this mean for us? What can we infer from all this stuff? Well, I think two things. First of all, if the medieval plagues, if the Black Death and the starvation caused by 2 years of rain, which killed off, at conservative estimates, half at least of all Europeans, if that didn't presage Christ's return, what will? If the destruction of the temple in AD 70, and if the First World War, if the Second World War, if neither the Holocaust nor Hiroshima nor the COVID plague of 2020, if none of that stuff beckons in the second coming, then the second coming isn't going to be marked by these things. These things aren't bad enough. Sometimes the world throws bad stuff at us, but that's not what Christ was talking about. They might seem bad to us, but they really aren't that bad at all. I suppose you could say to yourself, how will you know when the second coming is coming? And the answer is, if you don't know, it isn't here. When God comes, you will know. The second thing I think is this. Given that we will know when Christ is at the gate and not before, and given that it hasn't happened yet, we are in a strange state of limbo. Any day now it might happen. Of course, it might not happen in our lifetimes. It might not happen for 10,000 years, but it could happen tomorrow. It could happen next Wednesday afternoon at 2 o'clock. We just don't know. Therefore, friends, let us take heed of Christ's words and let us stay awake. Let us be ready. Let us be in a state such that when Jesus does return and we hear that key in the lock, he looks at us and he says, "Well done, my true and faithful servant," and not, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Friends, Advent is a wonderful time. It's a time of reflection, and it ought to lead us into a time of joy and of fun. But more than this, it ought to remind us that we ourselves need to be better reflections of the glory of God. Yes, the baby Jesus came to us in a stable amid the winter's snow, but were we ready? And were we deserving of such a gift? Are we ready now? Perhaps in return for God's gift of a Son given unto us, a people who walk in darkness, we should give God and everyone else a gift of our own. The gift of a new us, a new and better person, a person changed, better to reflect the glory of God, a person who does not sleep, who does not waver, and is always ready when the Master returns. Amen.